the stimulus had a very, very substantial effect on the restarting economic growth and saving millions of jobs from the risk of loss. And I do not believe, if you just look back over this period of time, if you look at the combined effect of what the Recovery Act did, what the Federal Reserve actions did, and what the actions we took to put out the financial fire did, you had an economy that was in free fall in the first 3 months of 2009, the second half of 2008, in absolute free fall. Hadn't seen anything like it since the Great Depression. That stopped, came to a stop, and you saw growth restart actually remarkably quickly. And even though we are digging out of this hole too slowly, and even though we have a long way to go before we dig out of this hole, it's important to recognize that we've had job creation by companies in this recovery start, I think, 18 months before it did in the recovery of 2001, 2003. So even though we're still facing a lot of challenges, and as Americans try to recover from the crisis, we're going to see a tougher recovery than is normally the case, we are growing. We've been growing for more than a year, and we had job creation come back sooner than we did in the last recession, which was a much milder recession, and with none of the challenges we face from this crisis. So the Recovery Act was decisive in that. It made an overwhelming difference, and it had a mix of, as you know, very substantial tax incentives as well as support for infrastructure, for states and local governments, for the unemployed, that made a big difference in incomes.
So in answer to my question, it was just about right in your view?
You know, that's a hard judgment to make. Let me try it a different way.
So is it too small, too large, or just about right?
Let me try it a little different way. Right now, even though you see a private sector healing, and we're in the, the fifth quarter of economic growth, we're not coming out of this fast enough. And if Washington does nothing, then we will risk having policy turn from being very supportive for growth, having a negative impact on growth. And the debate we should be having, Mr. Camp, I think, is what's the best way to make sure we're providing support for the middle class and for stronger investment by companies in the United States? Because ultimately, any recovery is going to have to depend on the private sector restarting investment, job creation. Again, we're seeing that, private investment in the first 6 months of this year increased at a rate of 20%, annual rate of 20%. So you're seeing pretty encouraging signs of companies investing again, but not at a pace yet that will allow us to bring down the employment rate fast enough. And that requires sensibly designed, fiscally responsible additional incentives for businesses to get people back to work and for improvements in our infrastructure. And again, what we're trying to do is to make sure we're giving the middle class more confidence about what their tax treatment is going to be in the future, and stronger incentives for businesses so they're going to see more investment in this country sooner.
So your answer is it was too small?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that these recoveries that follow financial crises are tough because they follow a period where Americans were living beyond their means. Americans have to save more, repair their balance sheets, and the crisis caused a huge damage to the basic confidence of Americans, economic security of Americans. It's time to heal that, and we are not prepared to make the mistake that so many other governments have made in the past, which is to too quickly decide that the obligation of government is over and have policy shift to restraint, because what that will do is push growth rates down, and it'll keep more people out of work sooner. And the best way to avoid that risk is, again, for Congress to act, and we need Congress to act. It's not something we can do. We need Congress to act to extend tax relief for the middle class and provide some more targeted support for investment. Again, we think there's a very, very high return, as many Republicans have said in the past, very high return in well-designed tax incentives for investment. We proposed some last 2 weeks, and we think we put those in place, businesses would be much more confident that they can even add to what's been a pretty healthy rate of recovery in private investment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sanchez, I think you're the last person. Thank you for your